Hello there, welcome to my review of the Rockford File, Season 3, Episode 19 and 20, To Protect and Serve, Part 1 and 2. Written by David Chase and directed by William Wyatt. The episode begins with Dennis arriving at a hostage situation. He's assisted by new face Leanne Sweeney, played by our Columbo connection Joyce Van Patten. The situation ends when the hostage taker runs out of the house, guns blazing, and Dennis is forced to take him out. We then cut to Jim arriving at his trailer. He's on a missing persons case looking for a Patty Fossler for her fiancé, Michael Kelly.
She was supposed to marry Kelly yesterday, only her parents kicked up a fuss. The pressure got too much, so she took off.
He then calls Dennis to check on a license plate, but he isn't home yet.
Oh, hi, Peggy. It's Jim. Is Dennis there?
He called a little while ago and said he was going to be held up at work.
We discover he's at a bar with Leanne, still a little shook up by the shooting.
That war wasn't such a bad act. If we had waited just a little bit for the gas to come, smoked him out.
While Leanne is clearly attempting to take things in a certain direction.
So why don't we go back to my apartment? I got some 12-year-old scotch. Birthday gift from Lions and Narc.
Jim tracks him down there and is clearly unimpressed with Leanne.
Sergeant Becker rolled a code 3 to a major 415, which could have turned out to be a 187.
I flunked math.
Back at his trailer, Jim's approached by two New York cops who he quickly spots aren't cops at all, but not quick enough to get the drop on them. They're also looking for Miss Fossler, but he does enough to make them run. The next morning, Leanne arrives at his trailer, calling him Jimbo and warning him to keep away from Dennis. He then gets a call from his client, asking for a meet, and casually mention he's moved to a new address.
Listen, I've moved out of my hotel.
There's a lot to unpack here, with Michael Kelly seemingly suspicious due to his sudden move, and the New York mobsters also looking for his apparent fiancée. Dots which Jim hasn't quite connected yet, but no doubt he's puzzled as to why two wise guys are looking for Patsy, if everything Kelly has said is true. Then there's Leanne, who is at first presented as a fellow officer, but whose behaviour reveals her to be a cop groupie or possibly stalker.
Let the officers do their job. I really admired you out there today.
Jimbo, I felt that I had to come here.
It's a pretty dazzling display of writing to reveal the character so subtly, and if you're not paying attention then you could easily miss that she's not a cop, as they never directly address it at this moment. It's revealed in these subtle ways the other police react around her, and how she is very clued up and willing to talk at length using cop jargon. It's also not immediately obvious that Jim dislikes her straight away. Not at all aware of who she is, but just on a feeling. Especially as Dennis is so casually friendly towards her. But when she calls him Jimbo in his trailer, having heard Dennis call him that, we know she's being overly familiar, and he does too. Jim meets with Kelly, confronts him about being lied to, quits, and is then threatened by Kelly to stay on the case. Or else.
Mr. Rockford here works for me and he wants to quit. I told him if he did that, I'd kill him.
We then cut to Dennis in Chapman's office, being told by Chapman about Kelly being a dangerous man, and asking him to help Rockford as much as he can in order to nab Kelly. The tangled web just got even more tangled.
Maybe we're being a little too strict about this. I mean, who's it going to hurt?
This is a great scene based on what has been set up already, as you are led to believe that Dennis is in trouble for helping Rockford out, because it's Chapman. And, based on Jim's encounter with Leanne, you're expecting her to have been the one who tipped off Chapman in her misguided efforts to help Dennis. But it's actually the complete opposite, and you really don't see it coming.
I think you should run that plate for Rockford.
Dennis gives Jim the plate he wanted, and Jim tracks the vehicle to a farm, only to be scared off by the guard dog. At Dennis's barbecue, he's possibly the worst detective in the world in his efforts to get information from Jim, and almost immediately comes clean.
Well, the lieutenant wanted me to pump you about your client, Michael Kelly.
It's at this point that Jim also finds out that Leanne is not a cop, which really irks Peggy, and with good reason.
Just what is a buff?
Well, it's a citizen who is fascinated by police. They like to spend time around the station house, get to know the fellas.
Dennis, that's not a buff, that's a groupie.
We then see Leanne give a statement about Dennis shooting a hostage taker, and we see it isn't just Jim that she annoys, as she inflates her own role in the incident.
Observers had begun to stray into the scene, so I then assisted in crowd control.
I wonder if we could get to the events as they relate directly to Sergeant Becker and the shooting.
It's a fantastic performance from Van Patten to be so incredibly annoying, in a way that's quite hard to pin down. It isn't a case of what she says, as although it's jargon heavy and how someone outside of the police might think that they talk, it's not heavy-handed. Instead, it's the way she says it. Not just confidently, but far too overconfidently. As if hers is the final word, and whatever she says shouldn't be believed just because it's the truth, but because she's the one saying it. It's just not how normal people act in those types of situations. As she goes to leave, she happens to see Chapman for the first time, and when she finds out Chapman outranks Dennis, we see exactly what type of person she is, as she immediately moves her affections towards him.
Hey, who's that just walked into the shooting review?
Oh, Lieutenant Chapman, ma'am.
Lieutenant, huh?
Dennis might still consider her just to be a harmless buff, but Peggy had her number as soon as she found out about Leanne.
That's a groupie.
Peggy, don't be silly, huh?
As Dennis is cleared for the shooting, Leanne hangs around, becoming further enamoured with Chapman as he chews out Dennis for getting nothing from Rockford. She then manages to manipulate just enough information out of Dennis to make trouble for him, accosting Chapman at the cop bar.
Yeah, well, this is a sort of a intimate conversation. Maybe we should go to my place.
She initially has Chapman intrigued, but overplays her hand, and for all his faults and his pathological hatred of Jim, Chapman is still a by-the-book officer, and tells Leanne where to go, which naturally only spurs her on. Jim goes back to the farm, this time in disguise, and finds out that Patsy really was engaged to Kelly. But before he can find out more, the New York goons show up. After making their escape, Patsy reveals that the two goons work for the boss of bosses in New York, and that Kelly is his lawyer, which is not the news that Jim wanted to hear, with his particular aversion to getting involved with the mafia in any way, shape or form. With Kelly and the Minetti crime family after Patsy because she knows way too much, and with both parties knowing who Jim is, he can't go home, and she can't go to the cops, and that's where part 1 ends. This is a fantastic part 1, with 2 parallel stories that both hold your attention. The nutty and potentially dangerously loud-mouthed Leanne getting a thrill from playing cops and robbers, alongside Jim up to his neck with a mob, in what could easily become a lethal case. All just works to ratchet up the tension, as we wonder how badly Leanne is going to land Jim in trouble, and maybe Dennis too. The way these 2 stories overlap, because of Leanne's desire to be let into this exclusive club, are beautifully intertwined so that we never quite know where the story is going to go next. The eventual introduction of the character of Patsy is a masterstroke too, initially being completely naive about how bad she's got it, having stayed with Kelly for far too long because she was enjoying it, only to think she could just walk away. Contrast this with Leanne's own type of naivety about how harmful what she's doing is, and you get a story where you absolutely don't know how it's going to end. Part 2 begins with Jim stashing Patsy on her friend's boat until he can get her on a plane to her brother in London. Jim's only hope is to convince the goons that he delivered Patsy to Kelly, and hope that they fight it out amongst themselves. Jim's plan might work too, but Leanne is just around the corner to put a fly in the ointment. She breaks into Kelly's estate at the same time that Jim is enacting his plan, and uses the opportunity to break into Jim's car, hiding in the trunk. Jim convinces Kelly that the goons nabbed Patsy and leaves, unaware he's picked up a hitchhiker. Leanne eventually gets out of the trunk at the docks and overhears Jim's plans to get Patsy to safety, before trying to use the information to get Rockford into trouble and to get in with Lieutenant Chapman.
I wonder, could you let me have Doug's home number?
No, I couldn't do that, ma'am. I'm sorry.
With nothing to do but wait, Patsy and Jim swap stories, and Jim is able to dispense some wisdom to Patsy.
Aren't you in enough of a mess without creating one in your own mind?
While this scene is essentially filler, what sets it apart from some of the other filler we've seen in other two-parters is that it does actually deepen our understanding of both characters. Why Patsy is a bit naive and a bit of a snob, and why Jim does what he does, while also revealing some of his prison experiences, letting us know that even getting the pardon doesn't wipe away his more difficult times inside.
Get in over our heads, we have a tendency to act.
If it is mere filler, it's the best kind of filler we've seen in a two-part episode that actually allows some character growth. The next day, we find the goons staking out Rockford's trailer. Although with Jim having made Rocky aware of the situation, there's no danger of anyone showing up there to get hurt. That is until Leanne tries to make even more of a nuisance of herself by breaking into the trailer and then acting tough when she gets caught by the mobsters.
Why don't you just start from the beginning?
As you might expect, this is a mistake on her part, as they have no qualms about getting what they want by any means.
Did you bring the girl over to Kelly's? Answer me.
She quickly realises she's in way over her head and blurts out everything she knows before getting knocked out.
Rockford's got the girl on the boat, but I don't know where Kelly is, but he's got her on a boat.
Any sympathies we might have for her after this ordeal quickly evaporate as she tries to act tough and really makes Jim angry.
What were you doing in my trailer?
Oh, you're the one that's in trouble, Rockford.
I want to know what happened here. What is it with you, lady? You some kind of banana?
And who can blame him, when Leanne has put Patsy's life and the life of his pal Wes on the line. Our utter contempt for her only increases when Jim asks her to call the cops while he goes after the goons.
Are you all right, lady? Is there something I can help you with?
I'll call back in a few minutes.
Only for her to try and use it to get in with Chapman again, now putting Jim's life in danger as well as Patsy and Wes's. She has a few drinks before trying again, finally getting Dennis mad enough to extract the real truth from her.
By all rights, this should be Doug's collar.
What collar? Listen, I'm not fooling around with you anymore.
This is a really bold move for the show, as it would have been easy to try and have us gain some sympathy for her by having her realise how deep she's in and doing the right thing. But instead, it goes in the opposite direction and shows her further decline as she listens in for the call on her police radio and once again tries to put herself into the story. At the docks, the goons manage to wing Wes and grab Patsy, while Jim tries to negotiate with them, all because of Leanne. She arrives just after the cops and the goons try to negotiate their way out of the situation, and, acting as if it's all a game, she continues to try and give Dennis advice, until he finally tells her where to go and has her removed.
I want her back. I want her way the hell back. I don't want to even see her face.
While he's distracted, Jim makes his own move, managing to rescue Patsy. Still in her own world, Leanne tries to ingratiate herself to Chapman, who immediately blows her off, before Dennis gives her some long overdue hard truths.
See, I just wanted to do what was best for everyone.
Leanne, you're lying again.
This is a sensational part 2 that rounds off a sensational episode, easily the best of the two-parters that I've watched so far. The pace is perfect. The story builds naturally, or rather both stories build naturally, and the performances are incredible. Each character has their part to play, and nothing they do seems out of character or unbelievable. Van Patten is so frustratingly annoying, but entirely designed to be that way, bouncing from Dennis to Chapman and back again as the situation requires, never quite living in reality. Jim's case would have been reasonably compelling on its own, although not too different from a few others we've seen before, but by adding this new dimension, and sticking to its guns with what the episode was trying to say, was a bold and expertly delivered choice. Even in the final scene where we see Leanne alone in the dark, still listening to her police radio, it's hard to feel any sympathy for her, as she has shown herself to be a completely selfish individual throughout. Yes, she's upset, but she's upset for herself, because of her own actions, like the tearful resignation of a politician who has been caught in a scandal of their own making. Not upset because of what they did, but because they can't get away with it anymore. It really is a masterpiece of an episode that completely commits to the story it's trying to tell, and for me there's no question that this is a 5 out of 5. Thank you. Goodbye.